So welcome everybody. This is our very first practical workshop for the Rights-Centric Education Quality Assurance System. And we've decided to record this part of the workshop because we don't want to have to repeat this every time. Some of these things might evolve during the process of these workshops, in which case we'll update those. But this is also just going to be a good overview to get us started. And what you need to know if you want to come next time is that people do have an opportunity to rename and switch off their cameras before we start recording this section. We always want to make it possible for you to be as public or private as you wish, because that is your right. So in this workshop, I'm going to just have a quick look at what we are going to be looking at in terms of the steps for using this quality assurance system. So it's a fairly simple process. The first step would be to sign the pledge, and we'll have a look at that pledge in a little bit more detail in a moment. But after you've signed the pledge to say that you're going to be overhauling your human rights alignment in your educational practice, the next step would be to think about, what are we currently doing well? What does your family or your micro school or your other practice that you have that works with young people educationally, what is it getting right, let's say, or doing well in terms of human rights? And how does that fit with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and the related guidance documents? Because there are particular articles and concepts and suggestions of how to actually fulfill young people's rights. And you can link up what you are doing to those articles. The next step would be to think, in the light of that, what tips can we offer to other people? Because there might be other people who are looking to improve and overhaul their own practice in ways that fit particularly with what you happen to be doing well. So it'll be really great in these reports and submissions if we're already including that perspective of thinking, how can I actually offer a nice example for other people as well? Just going to, if you could just mute yourself if you've just come in, please. Thank you. The next step after that would be, now we've looked at what we're doing well, but there is always further that we can go because this is a journey. So what do we want to work on next? Which of the young people's rights are we maybe not yet addressing? Or maybe, there's another layer that we could stretch to in terms of addressing those even more thoroughly. So here we want to be looking at what the children themselves say is a priority. What do they feel is important to work on? And then again, we come back to our United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and the related guidance documents to have a look at what could we do about that priority. And then we could also look at the Rights-Centric Education Network and things other people have posted for inspiration and ideas of what's possible. And we could also look at whether we need any guidance or mentoring if we're feeling a little lost. We do have advisors in the network, and maybe one of them is somebody who could help us. But all in all, that is geared towards deciding what feels realistic to commit to as a first step. What are we going to focus on in terms of going beyond where we are now? And once we've done all of that, we're going to get back to discussing with the children, what is our commitment going to be to what we're actually going to be working on as we're moving forward. Then that will put us in a position to write our submission. And AI assistance is absolutely acceptable for helping you actually write it up and link it to the different articles. All home languages are acceptable. And it's a good idea to check with the children if they agree that the submission is actually ready, or else to revise it as needed until everybody feels that this is what we are going to do together. And then the obvious final step would be to send our submission for publication. And then once we've spent a bit of time doing what we said we were going to do, and we feel ready, we can hold a review session. We can see what progress did we make, and then what do we want to work on next? Is there another level of this particular commitment we want to push further, or are we ready to tackle a different right and try something new? And then, of course, one would go through the same steps of deciding, is there something we want to add now to what we do well? From our experience with the first time around, tips we can offer people for what we did with that commitment and how we achieved it, and then choosing our next priority, writing our submission, and making our next submission. So that's the basic structure that we're going to be going through. And I'm going to break down just a couple of the steps in there in terms of questions that have already been arising. So firstly, when you sign the pledge, you'll see that in point 5 of the pledge, there are some very specific things that you are committing to. And it doesn't mean that you're committing to having already done all of that. And it doesn't mean that you're committing to doing all of that as your first step. It means that everything mentioned is part of your goal, and you're committing to taking step after step till you get there. Now, this point 5 is drawn from the World Programme for Human Rights in Education, and it's basically got 3 sections that are included in our pledge. The first is to publish a code of conduct for an environment free of discrimination, violence, sexual abuse, harassment, and corporal punishments, including procedures for resolving conflicts and dealing with violence and bullying. The second is to provide opportunities for children for self-expression, responsibilities, and participation in decision-making in accordance with their age and evolving capacity. And the third is to provide opportunities for children to organize their own activities for representing, mediating, and advocating their interests. So these are also sort of gateways to all of the rest, because if the children are in an interaction with you that's free of violence and harassment and all of the rest, and there's appropriate procedures for resolving conflict, and they've got opportunity to participate in decision-making, and they've got opportunities to organize their own activities and advocate for their interests, then that's going to help us, if we just think back to the previous slide, that's going to help us actually support them in genuinely participating in setting priorities together as partners, which will then take us to all of the other rights in the end. Then the next question, what do we do well? What are we proud of? What do the children feel is going well? Would be your guidance on this one. And quite importantly, this is a way to show the world what matters to you. So, for example, if you happen to be a micro school, or you happen to be a family in a place where you might experience some pushback, or you feel like you need to fly under the radar, this is a nice opportunity to showcase what you are actually doing and show that it is actually quite aligned, for example, with the fulfillment of certain rights, which can be useful in certain circumstances. But it's also a way to show other people what's possible and to inspire them, because we often find that some micro schools and home educating families go quite a lot further with young people's rights fulfillment than most people realize can actually be done. And this is also where giving tips about how you got there and maybe some insight into the obstacles that you encountered or possible solutions that they might want to be aware of is very, very helpful. And over time, we hope that this will build up to become quite a precious resource for the world, that gradually it will create a map with a number of paths through it that people will then be able to more easily take. The step of what do we want to work on next? The first question under there is, what do the children say is priority? So this might be exactly what we actually need to work on first. How do we include children's voices in a real way? This is a very good first commitment, again, because it's actually a gateway to everything else. So that might be what you initially decide to work on. figuring out how to actually make sure that the children's voices can be included in a way that they actually feel safe and heard, and it's genuine participation rather than just being token. On the other hand, you might already, have children very involved in decision making, in which case do you maybe have resources that you can share for other people. We actually want to create a nice resource directory on all sorts of things, but starting with exactly this, with how to actually go about involving children in a participatory way. Or maybe you even want to volunteer as an advisor for this. Then in terms of this step, what guidance is there about any particular right in the UNCRC and its related guidance documents? How would you know? And this could also be, for example, a very good first commitment, that the first commitment will be, we will educate ourselves and the children that we are interacting with around children's rights on whichever topic it is that you've chosen, maybe corporal punishment or student voice or, whatever it might be, and educate ourselves in how can that look to fulfill those in practice. That research and education step might be exactly what you commit to first. On the other hand, if you feel you already have that fairly well in hand, you might be able to help create summaries for people, because some of these documents are quite a read, quite a bit of work to read, and they are not necessarily going to be available in all local languages. So are you able to help create summaries or translations? Can you help create AI prompts for people to use? This is something that we're already working on, is creating cut and paste things that you can put into an AI to help find out how does what you are looking at relate to the UNCRC, or might you even be able to help train an AI? Because in the end, we'd really like to have an AI service that people can upload in their own language, or just sort of and literally in their own way of expressing, and that the AI can actually help them identify what it is they're trying to do and how it aligns. And again, maybe you are in a position to volunteer as an advisor for this. Then our final question for now, while we're doing this first round on this first workshop, questions have come up about anonymity, because in some places, for example, education outside of school environments might not be legal, or people might experience problems with their community if they're too public. So we do allow people to post anonymously, but we aren't able to look after your data for you securely. We're a completely volunteer-run, money-free network. So what we would advise you to do is to use a pseudonym and a non-identifiable email address, because although we won't be publishing your email address, hacking is always a risk. And then you obviously wouldn't include things like your contact information and so on your form. Whereas people who, for example, are also participating in this partly in order to be able to broadcast just what fantastic best practice they are doing, would want to include all of that. You wouldn't want to include all of that. And then, of course, you can create a dated and signed affidavit that links yourself to whatever public identifier you have used. So that should you encounter a problem down the line where it helps you to be able to say, I've actually been participating in this rights-centric education network, and look at what I've been doing. Here's my public record of, how we do things well and how we are improving even more on that every year. And this is how I prove that, on the date that person first started posting, I got this affidavit saying that this is my post. And that could be a helpful thing. So now we could go to looking at the pledge and all the wording in the pledge or the terms and conditions. I don't know to what extent people have already done that. So I don't want to waste people's time going through all that wordiness if we don't need to. But at the same time, if that's what we want to be discussing, I'm now handing it over to the participants. Do you have questions or requests or suggestions of what you want to do now? And if you would like the recording to stop now so that you can speak freely, please just private message myself or Sifan. And I must just quickly remember to make you a co-host there, Sifan, because I think I didn't do that yet. Right. Okay, then I'm going to keep recording until such time as one of us gets a message, because I think it'll also be useful for as many people as possible to be included. And if we switch the recording off, we'll probably offer an anonymous high-level summary of what happened with it off. So, over to you. I guess my first question would be, is the process clear and does it feel manageable? And if not, then let's find out.
My one question is, what does publishing look like? Where is that? How do you go about doing that, etc.?
Yeah. Okay, so this is a really, really great question, because this is also something we want to throw to these workshops in terms of what should it look like. For example, one of the things that has Safan and myself currently a little bit stumped is that obviously with a volunteer-run network, the best way for us to do this is to make it that you enter the thing on your form and that pops up straight on the RCE web page on the relevant page. Automatically. However, that is begging for trolls, right? Especially given that we're allowing anonymous posting. So yeah, we'd really love some interaction around exactly that question. How can we best do this to be most advantageous and manageable for the people who post, while still having it make sense? So I don't know if you want to stew on it and chew on it a little bit. I'm seeing some messages in the chat. I'm going to quickly go here too. I'm too overwhelmed to know what to ask. Right. Yeah. So this is also where people may be really struggling. For example, in countries like South Africa, where the provision for children is very, very minimal. If your children don't fit easily into a mainstream public school, that families can get into really dire positions. And that's also one of the reasons that we want to have this network. That one of the things we also want and will be creating is going to be resources that families can draw on for educational purposes, so that even if you kind of don't have any resources, as long as you can get online, you'll be able to access something helpful. Another question in the chat: would you need to set up an editorial committee to process what is submitted for publishing? So it could be done if we had the volunteers to do it. I know that Sifan and myself are already kind of maxed with what we're doing at this level of figuring out and refining the process and making people aware of the process. It's quite a big job to read what comes in. So a couple of the ideas that we've had, for example, is to publish things first onto the Discord community so that anyone in the Discord community can have a look, or publish things in a certain section of the website that's only visible to other people who have already posted for about a week. So it's sort of a holding zone before it goes through, so that we can sort of screen out the trolls, but also so that we can maybe offer into people who might not realize that what they've posted. For example, you might get a submission that says something like, I'm going to educate myself, I'm going to educate the children about the fact that homosexuality is a sin or is a cult as part of their rights to be safe. Right? We might get a genuine submission like that, for example, and then having a bit of a holding zone then might enable other participants to be able to engage and say, look, can we support you a little bit on this? Have you had a look at the actual human rights discourse and so on? So that would be the advantage of something like that. The thing is that we then either need to start charging fees, which we are not going to do, or we need to start getting donations to pay people for their time, or we need to get enough volunteers that somebody's going to be committing to keep an eye. More questions and thoughts?
I have one other question, and I don't know if this would necessarily be answered now, but I'm just kind of in my like, I don't know, advising kind of brain right now. How do we call more people in without lording this over them, making them feel less? And when I say that, I'm not talking specifically about like self-directed education people, but like other people. How do
Yeah,
we say, hey, this is important without making it seem like this is like a very esoteric group, you know? And
yeah,
what kind of messaging do we use and how do we accomplish that? Yeah.
yeah. So I'm not sure if you were able to access the recording of the inauguration where I was talking about the slanty rope. Okay.
I'll check
So
that out. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So I'll just really quickly recap because not everybody might get to that. So there's a lovely concept from a physical education educator called Moscow Moston, who was training kids for high jump. And he saw that, um, you put the high jump here and some kids get over. Then you raise it and less kids get over. And you keep raising it until only one kid gets over, and that's the winner. And he was like, this doesn't make sense because those who need most practice get the least practice. So he started putting the rope like this and saying, you jump over wherever you want to jump over that you feel ready for. And then game theorist Bernard de Querfen said, what if we stop doing it as individuals? What if we make this a collective exercise so that everybody has to arrange themselves holding hands at the level of the rope they can get over, and then time their jump to go over together at whatever level they're ready, so that it becomes all of us achieving something together. And that's the spirit that we want to do this in. So we want to be absolutely welcoming to a space, for example, where what we are doing well maybe is providing free access to education, which some of the most amazingly participatory democratic schools can't do. But maybe what their strength is that their offering is free. And now they're going to start working at the beginning of reducing the severity of their corporal punishment, because that's what the children have decided is priority. And we want to welcome, that parent or, that public school maybe, with as much enthusiasm as we're going to welcome, the best democratic school, because this is what we're looking at on our planet right now, right? Is that we have to stop playing games of who's right and who's better than. And when human rights gets used for games of who's right and better than, then it's not human rights anymore, right? Yeah. In my experience, I mean, I've met a number of parents and interacted with other spaces where people just don't know what's possible. They've grown up with what they've grown up with, and they're surrounded by what they're surrounded with. Um, so it's only as we welcome and expose each other to what is possible that these things can shift. So who here feels like you know what you need to do to make your first submission and you're good to go? Okay, there's one, there's another.
Yeah, I feel
Ex-
good.
Okay, great. All right. Um, who feels like you really, really would like some guidance on maybe um, using the AI to help you identify something? Anyone?
Yes, that would be me, ma'am.
Okay, great. And you have an internet connection, you have a smartphone or other device access to the
Yes,
internet?
I do have the above.
Great. Have you used any chat GPT, for example, before or not yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
Not
great.
yet.
All right. So then that's something that we'll prioritize now, making as a first resource so that you can play with it a little bit. And then maybe at the next workshop, you can come back and see how you went. Would that be a good way forward?
Yes, that is a good way forward, and thank you.
Great. I'm just having a look here at the chat again and trying to decide whether to go public. Yes. Yes. So this would be another thing that we need to discuss, I think, to help people decide whether they want to be public or anonymous. And of course, you have the option of being anonymous at first and then adding your identifying details later if you're not sure. Any thoughts? I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that if you're in a country where the government really, truly doesn't understand why anybody would do things differently than attending a public school, and where they are well organized and tend to take drastic action that compromises children's rights in the name of education, then I would suggest that you consider starting anonymous. It's unfortunate. This is one of the reasons that this movement is necessary, because, as Stefan always points out, the reason that general comment number 1 includes the phrasing roughly, that the child does not lose their rights by virtue of passing through the school gates is because this is what was happening and still is happening, that the right to education is used as an excuse to ride roughshod over all other rights. And that doesn't work. So if we create a resource for how to play with the AI to help you start creating your submission, and what else do you need personally in order to get ready to make your first submission and feel comfortable signing the pledge?
Yana, is it going to be obvious what we need to include in the submission?
Right. So there's the question I'd like to know. So if I've said to you, what are we doing well? And how does that line up with the UNCRC? And what do the children feel is a priority to take further? And how can we do that? And where does that fall in the UNCRC? Which article, for example, are we working with? And then you write that up. So you sign the pledge, you say, yes, we're pledging to overhaul our practice to progressively align more and more with human rights. This is what we're already doing that aligns with human rights. This is what we're busy with to take it even further. Would you feel that it's obvious?
Yes, that part's clear. I'm just thinking like details, like
Yeah.
When I say we, where am I telling you what we is?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So I think there is already provision, Stefan, correct me, that you'd be signing the pledge in a certain capacity. So I think when you sign the pledge, you choose a capacity. You say, I'm a home educating parent, or I'm a micro school with 20 learners, or I'm a public school, or I'm a remedial therapy practice, or I'm a summer camp, or I'm a children's museum, whatever it might be. That would be there as you signing the pledge.
Well, we don't quite have that kind of uh, granularity because it's more that there are some areas that I thought were a legal basis for doing this. For example, for a parent, it's different to a school or a public school or a private school. So those are the things that we are capturing at the moment.
Mm. But of course, you're free to add all of the niche nuance that I mentioned. And then some people might want to add additional things. So if you are watching this in South Africa, for example, then I would strongly recommend that you would maybe use the self-directed education optimizing conditions as a framework, and I'll be making that resource available as well. And I would strongly suggest that you include information on each of those optimizing conditions, how we are doing this well, because then that will also create a strong message on how you are thinking about education.
I have a follow-up to what I was asking. So I'm thinking in terms of data, because I know we're talking about having a way to process the information and generate some data. So were you going to want to know things like how many students are in a group, or the setting? Is it out in nature? Is it, different things like that?
I don't know to what extent that's necessary. Do you have thoughts on that, Beth?
No, except that if we wanted to look at, whether group size made any difference or environment made any difference in the ability to quickly implement these things, like maybe being in a certain environment is a hindrance, or having too many kids is a hindrance or something. We might, but I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there because it occurred to me.
Yeah, great. So look, I would encourage those of us who are happy to be public, I would encourage us to go for it. The ones who are flying under the radar, you don't want to give so many details that it's obvious who you are, right? Yeah.
I was saying in the chat, I feel like granularity might be helpful for those that are reading the submissions. And I don't know what that would look like when you make one submission. Is it connected to your profile that says who you are, or is it just a separate submission? And should you be detailing who you are in each separate submission? Like, what would be helpful for the readers to understand?
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
I think it would be easier for the readers if people had a profile. It can be minimal and fake if you're hiding, but at least you would associate when you see new things come in, like, oh yeah, that's that person that had this goal last year, and instead of them all seeming like new random submissions.
Mm.
I think for sure we would have some kind of I mean, there'll be a public facing name that you use. If you are a school, then you'd have the name of the school. If you are, let's say, an unschooling parent, you might have, such and such family or a pseudonym or whatever it is. So, like, if you see that a particular school X has submitted this, then you click on the name, you should be able to see their profile and what the other submissions have been, and how many of the commitments they have made are still open or pending or that sort of thing. And I think that you have a page or something that people can edit as their profile as a free form text is kind of easy to do. Um, to have kind of filtering type of questions, like based on the age ranges or the number, or whether this is full-time or part-time. Because in some ways it's useful for people to be able to filter on those, but then it also can make it very tedious for people to create the profile or update the profile when circumstances change. So we'll have to, I think probably what we might do is have a pre-text kind of profile to start off with. And as people use the system and we start to see that these are kind of things that people want to be able to filter on or something like that, then maybe introduce some structured forms to capture those things. But I think to start off with, maybe the free text is going to allow us to hit the ground running without getting like bogged down into another details.
So we want to make sure that the basics are in place from, as soon as possible, so that we sort of start on the right foot. And then some of these things can be refined and expanded over time. One of the reasons we really want to get started with a number of kind of early adopter submissions right now is that we're also going to feature this quite strongly at the Learning Planet Festival in January. And it might even be nice, just a thought that I'm having as I'm saying it, is it might be nice to actually create one of the events at that Learning Planet Festival to be sort of a panel or interview thing with a few early adopters. Why did you decide to do this? What does your submission look like? Could be really, really nice for those who are willing to be highlighted. As you were saying, Dan, in order to kind of set that tone for how we are, how we roll. Yeah. Okay, we've still got about another 15 minutes that we can spend today. We don't have to use the whole time.
I think a little observation that I want to drop in is that so part of the reason why we are using human rights and especially child rights in this is because this has some kind of legal protection. How much legal protection there is can vary based on, for example, some countries have a separate law on children's rights that they introduced after ratifying the CRC. I think Mexico is one, and I think maybe India. I'm not sure, but Mexico is one that I've heard is good. And but then still that is what it says on paper. So what it actually is in practice and how do the courts interpret it kind of thing can be variable. And then in a country like Sri Lanka, the legal protection is less. But nevertheless, like there was a case on corporal punishment of a school child that went to the Supreme Court, where in the judgment they recognized that although this hasn't been legislated into Sri Lankan law, we still recognize that Sri Lanka ratified this treaty, and therefore these commitments do apply to us. So, and then it's the legal basis that almost every UN member state has adopted, except the US, but it's just because it's a lot of weird politics in the US to what is it for the US to ratify a human rights treaty. So everywhere else there's some kind of legal basis, and then because this exists in many countries, we can sort of compare and say, like, in these countries, this is how this right is respected, and we ought to do it in our country as well because we've ratified it, etc. So there is some legal benefit in doing so. Whereas, for example, if you say that we are following all the optimizing conditions of self-directed learning, the coach could be like, yeah, so what? And then what does this mean in a court of law? The downside of doing that is that sometimes we have to kind of try to make sense of things that are in legal English as opposed to plain English. And sometimes it may not be very obvious how something comes about. And but this is, I think, something that once we start having a few more examples on board. So, for example, if we have a justice committee which is mostly comprised of children that deals with disciplinary issues to describe how this is an realization of children's right to freedom from violence, participation rights in terms of right to be heard, etc., then everybody else who has a similar system can just copy that in and say, this is also what we do. And then we could have 50 or 500 or whatever number. So it's going to be a little bit tricky maybe at the start to get the language sorted out. But once we have that sort of conversion kind of thing in place, like, this is the kind of practice that is happening and these are the rights that it relates to, then it's going to become easy. But initially, I think we will have a little bit of a stumbling block around that. So I think one of the things I hope we can do through these workshops is where people start writing some stuff, and either at the workshops or in between the workshops, we look at how can we relate this to something in the rights discourse, or if we can go into detail, like in the general comments on the rights, they go into a lot more detail on things. And we can refer to in general comment article, this to say this, and this is exactly what we're doing here. Then we look more credible, look more legitimate.
Right. So, Beth, you're saying you can do your submission in the next few days. Is there already a place to submit it? I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this, but my initial thought is, I think, are you on Discord, Beth? I think you are. Yes. What I'd suggest is send it straight into the Discord platform. And then what we'll actually do is, we'll all have a look at it and get some inspiration from it. And maybe we'll make suggestions, or maybe we'll just go, wow, that's great. Can we use it as a template? And then it would be fantastic if it's in the next day or two, because then we can actually bring it in to the next workshop and say, for example, this is what Beth has submitted, right? And how would yours look similar to Beth's, or how would yours look different to Beth's? I think the sooner that we have a few of these submissions in hand, it's going to get more and more concrete for people, especially the people who are feeling overwhelmed. How does this translate into your position? Unfortunately, Riverstone's closed. Otherwise, I would have done Riverstone's by now. But yeah, I'm now moving into advisor status and parent mode. But yeah, I'll try and do a parent submission in the next day or two. Dan?
And just for people who may not be comfortable with Discord, then you can email it to the network at Rights-Centric Education address, and I'll copy it over to the Discord.
Great.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'll try and do a submission as well. And I think one of the questions that we want to ask is what is missing, and what is missing that would be helpful for people to understand, that way we can eventually build up kind of a suggestion on pieces about the learning environment, pieces about, all of that kind of, that would help people, just in the future, looking over them.
Great. And on that note too, if you are watching this recording, and you've got questions that we haven't covered in this recording, or suggestions that we haven't covered, please email to info@rightcentric.education. If I got that right, Sifan, I always get muddled. It's rights.
Network
That's
rights-centric.edu. And we can put it in the comments of the video when we publish it.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, please do interact, even if you're watching the recording. So we want to, over these next few workshops, really, make as much progress as we possibly can. Okay. So yeah, I'm excited. We'll have at least a couple of submissions in the next few days. And also, if you're watching this or if you are here, please make sure that you do participate in the doodle poll to attend the next workshop, unless you feel you really don't need to. It would be great. All right. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to ask or say, suggest? Then shall we keep it efficient and wrap it up? Or am I rushing you and you needed time to think? All right. It sounds like there's a few more people going to be working on their submissions. So this is fantastic. You know, I would really actually encourage anyone who's here or watching this recording to just have a go. You know, just have a go. Bang something out, even if it's just in very basic point form, because at these workshops, we literally can workshop it. We can switch off the recording. You can say, I'm stuck over here. We can all come and look at your submission and chew on it and make suggestions. You know, this is the advantage of being an early adopter. Hopefully by this time next year, that won't be possible because there'll be too many people submitting. Whereas right now, you can get loads of personal attention and support. So I think let's close on that note. And then you also know these meetings are nice and efficient, and they're not going to take 6 hours of your time. So you can definitely come to the next one. So with that, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And we've just got somebody just arriving. Oh my goodness me. I'm just going to admit him to say hello and goodbye. And for now, I'm going to stop the recording. Okay.